Welcome back to Story Hustler. I'm Dylan.
And I'm Mike.
Like and subscribe and share with your friends. We wanted to do an episode right before we go into the final week in the trial of the Samuelites. And what a whirlwind case this has been.
3 weeks of really craziness and heartbreaking, heart-wrenching stuff.
Yeah, nearly 40 witnesses. The prosecution called nearly 40 witnesses.
Yeah, we've been counting, trying
Yeah.
to keep an accurate
I
count.
think we had it inaccurate in one of our videos. I said around 30, but we have counted and it's closer to 40 witnesses.
Yeah, it looks like it's right at 40, give or take.
Yeah.
But very strong case by the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Very strong. And it was a lot of the women and girls that really suffered most of the abuse of Sam and his perverted 3-year spree. And
all of them basically just telling the same story about events in time, starting at about 2009 when
2019.
2018 and early 2019 when Sam first he really first came on the radar screen for law enforcement when his then wife turned him in and basically said, I need to get a restraining order against this guy because Sam had let it be known to his biological daughter and his wife at the time that he wanted to take the daughter as his wife and have children with her.
Yeah.
And that woman was the first really to sound the alarm about this. And that's, how many years ago? And
a while.
Just so anyhow, this case has laid out all the details, starting really at that point when Sam sort of came on the radar screen of law enforcement.
Yeah, and you would think that him being on the radar screen of law enforcement, that later on when people started reporting him for other suspicious behaviors, that maybe they would look into it a bit more, but it doesn't really sound like that is what happened in this scenario. It kind of sounds like law enforcement and FBI agents really waited and waited and waited until they were absolutely forced to do something about this because Sam was just so flamboyant and in the public eye and wanting attention in his influencer era, if you will.
And so reckless.
Reckless.
This is the thing that just strikes me is in the history of this story, chased so many of these guys and helped in finding them and getting them prosecuted. And I have never seen a guy that was more reckless in his behavior and screaming for attention. I guess that's one of the themes that, it does seem to be sort of a step-by-step failure of law enforcement that ultimately led to a success in the prosecution of Sam and but the system didn't work well at all. And I think before we get off on that, I really think that the point I want to make, having listened to this now more than a dozen women and girls of that 40 witnesses, more than a dozen were the young women and girls who were directly impacted by Sam Bateman and his male followers.
And their testimonies were incredibly powerful, and they're just so strong. They really are. A lot of them just spoke about where they're at today and just how leaps and bounds ahead of where they were. I mean, they were underage brides not even 4 years ago, and now, they're in school and looking forward to college, and they like learning, and they like normal things that they're allowed to like as children. They are allowed to be themselves and find their voices, and
that was the best part. That's the silver lining of this trial, because they've had now 2 young women who were taken by Sam at the age of 9,
Yep.
a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, 12, 14. And now these girls are now 3 years down the road. So they're still young girls. And they were on the witness stand telling how their fathers, how their male caretakers basically just gave over to this guy, Sam Bateman. And how he just came on like gangbusters and basically pillaged the extended families of 2 men. This guy, Moroni Johnson, and Liddell Beislein, both of those men at the time when Sam sort of emerged as this self-proclaimed prophet, both of those men were basically in control of not only their large families, but several other families that had been assigned to them, with Warren Jeffs kicking so many men out. Yeah. And Sam just went and feasted on them, gathered up more than 20 women, 10 underage girls, and we've just heard all of the young women where they first met Sam, when they were sort of pressured into a marriage with him, which really meant nothing more than them coming and sitting on his lap or taking a walk in a park, and suddenly they're married to him. And a
And
couple of
he's
days
starting to abuse them.
and a couple of days later, he's starting to sexually abuse them and ultimately raping all of them.
Yeah, and that's all just incredibly disturbing. And then this overarching theme that honestly these people can be given away is also incredibly
Oh,
disturbing. The fact that these male caretakers can just say, well, you belong to Sam now, or you belong
and
to,
that's literally what Moroni and
yeah.
Liddell were doing.
And that's what Sam was doing. He was then partitioning out all of his wives, and he was like, well, now you belong to Liddell, or now you belong to Torrance, or now you're Moroni's.
In moments he did that, and that was one of the really bizarre things. A couple of times he insisted on his male followers having sex with his wives, but throughout, people have said how paranoid and more like jealous Sam became with his wives. But there became this one night where he basically just brought all of the male followers together, Moroni, Torrance, and Liddell, and insisted on them having sex with underage girls, other wives, pregnant wives. If nothing, Sam just. I thought that listening to Warren Jeffs rape a little 12-year-old girl on a ceremonial bed in that temple down in Texas was, as about as messed up as I was going to hear. But Sam really took to this group sex, having sex with male followers, and took it to such, just such a
Just huge orgies with children involved. They just use these women and children as pawns in their depraved sex games.
And all of that really is what it boiled down to. Sam just became Caligula, according to these young women, and this is what breaks my heart every time I think that somebody should have acted sooner. All of these girls are saying that Sam every night was doing this when he was in Lincoln, when he moved back to the Blue House, when he moved to took all the women to the Greenhouse. Apparently, nightly, 2 or 3 women and girls were being sexually assaulted and raped by this guy. And again, when you think about just the missed opportunities of law enforcement, thinking that's going on every day, you think, how could this have gone on for months and years?
Well, I feel like we're kind of seeing that, how it can go on, because nobody talks about it. Nobody covers it. There's not even a local news station in the courtroom. I feel like as a country, we're like, these Sound of Freedom movies pop up and we're all like, oh, we have to stop trafficking. We have to do something. Well, now you have a real life case of trafficking and it doesn't seem like anyone cares or anyone wants to talk about it. I'm baffled when people ask us why we discuss this, because kids are being abused. Women are being abused. And if we can in any way give them a platform to say, we hear you and we're here to help, we're not turning a blind eye. These are trafficking victims and these are real life cases and nobody's listening, nobody's covering it, and nobody wants to talk about it. And it baffles me.
Yeah, we're the only people in our limited broadcast ability with our TikToks and whatever
we try. We're small, but we're trying.
Our show. We're the only people who are doing this in some sort of broadcast
day to day.
We have a friend who is doing, I think, a very good job. We recommend his coverage. Joe Duhownik of Courtroom Service News, and we'll put a link to one of his stories. He's a writer. A print journalist, and he's the only other guy that's in court every day. And we are baffled because we did everything we could to sort of alert a number of our friends in the media, and there are no shows on this. And to your point, trafficking is now one of those. It's now a political issue where people at Canada's I'm tough on trafficking. They're weak on trafficking. We're doing this about trafficking. They're doing that about trafficking.
We're making movies about it.
We're making movies about phonies like that guy up in Utah. And they're real cases. And we have, I think, been on top of them more effectively than damn near anybody. And this is one of them. Sam Bateman.
In the polygamy realm.
And
there's so many other missing women and children that we haven't covered.
We are in a narrow lane of sort of the Mormon fundamentalists, but that's where we find ourselves, and that's where our contacts are. But Sam Bateman was such an obvious case and should have been dealt with long before. We were trying to provide evidence to the FBI long before they now even acknowledged they were on the case, and they never responded to us. And it seems like there were other people blowing the whistle. That's discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
And with the sort of failing their way into success with Sam, I hope lessons are learned that people act on red flags more aggressively. And if the feds or anybody else really wants to make a statement, there's still another parallel case
Mm-hmm.
involving Warren Jeffs, his edict to gather up the children, and at least the 8 families that have missing kids. If the feds are really serious about this, go back and file federal charges against Heber Jeffs when he Warren's nephew. Because when Warren put out the edict, gather up the children, this moron went and snagged some 12-year-old girl,
His
and
niece.
his niece, and took her across state lines, clearly in the interest of gathering up the young girls to be married.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big deal. It was called kidnapping when he was finally captured a month later.
Custodial interference
And
is
then
what
they
it
took it back
was.
to a Utah court, no federal charges, and dumbed it down and basically gave the guy a kiss on the forehead and said, go home. And no charges. Feds, if the statute of limitation hasn't run out, go file charges against Heber Jeffs. It's a bigger demographic, and you can show that you're really interested in chasing down and stopping the trafficking in this fundamentalist community here in the American Southwest.
And just because you don't talk about this case doesn't mean it doesn't still happen. Like, these people are still being abused,
Yeah,
trafficked,
yeah.
brainwashed, and just because people don't want to talk about it, because they're awful stories, they are gut-wrenching stories.
This
It's
has been
not.
3 weeks of this. You've heard.
It's
We're
been
now.
awful, and it's not like pleasant to listen to any of this, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve to be heard.
Oh, I think more than anything, they deserve to be
That's
heard.
what
The
I
fact
think.
that they have been ignored for so long, and
It's
again, this is
disgusting.
Sam's story is so not new. He took it to sort of pervy extremes,
Mm-hmm.
but he's just one more uh, prophet, self-anointed prophet, who's going to capitalize on the vulnerabilities of people in communities like this, desperate for who feel like they just cannot live their lives unless they're attached to a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be a con man to come and take advantage of that kind of mojo.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's definitely been an interesting trial, and even though Sam's not in the courtroom per se,
Oh,
it's just Torrance and Liddell, the brothers. His Sam's presence and Moroni's presence looms over everything.
yeah.
They are just so they're basically there, just not physically.
Yeah, and though if for those who want to do the deep dive into this, Sam and Moroni were the guys who basically sort of came up with the idea that we're no longer going to follow Warren's edict about
Mm-hmm.
no sex. And again, folks, Warren Jeffs from his prison cell had basically issued an edict to say no more sex. So there were no babies in this culture that had nothing but babies. 10-year, 12-year period where people really just stopped having sex. That's not sustainable, and it was inevitable that some guys like Sam or Moroni were going to come along and say, screw what Warren says.
Mm-hmm.
We're now going to let people have their own revelations, and we're going to start gathering up young women. And so Moroni and Sam, they're the ones who really broke theologically, became heretics in the FLDS
Yep.
community, but they sort of just took it off the rails, and then they started gathering up followers, and then there were lots of men, well, at least several men, who were just happy to give up their wives, their daughters, their nieces, whatever Sammy wanted. And he's just a really perverted, depraved man.
Completely. And I mean, when Tolga, the documentary producer, took the stand, he's like, people were giving up their men were giving up their whole families for this guy. Like, I wouldn't give up my dog. And it's
Yeah,
just the parallels between being raised in that culture and thinking like, this is my only option. Like, I belong to this man, or so these father figures are telling me and pressuring me. Like,
yeah,
versus people on the outside, they're like, how could anybody ever think that way? And
right.
it's hard to put yourself in those shoes, but you have to understand that sometimes these people don't even know who like the president of the United States
At all.
currently
No
is.
contact with what we
No,
think of as the outside world.
no internet.
And we've seen all of that. We've seen in all of these women and girls, the culture that they were raised in, where perfect obedience
Mm-hmm.
is the big thing.
Keep
Where
sweet pills.
keep yeah, just funny. There's somebody mentioned keep sweet pills, and
I don't
we're going
think
to
they're a
talk.
real thing.
We're gonna, but just the what all of these and all of these young girls and women and teenagers spoke with just such a sense of, like, knowledge about the world that was
Mm-hmm.
beyond their years, wisdom beyond their years. These young teenage girls talking about being given it to Sam at 9, at 10, him raping them, watching him rape other girls, living in basically this harem of 2 bedrooms for months with 25 women and 10 babies, and Sam just having sex with all of them all the time. And these young women are talking about this with such, you know, clarity and authority, and all of them, I think, impress us by how they have seized their own identity
Yeah.
and are not being defined by any. They always started the testimony, and what are you doing now? They're in school, they're on swim team, they're in music, they're doing theater,
They
reading, taking college
they
courses.
found their own sense of fashion. Like you can just see based off of what
Each
they wear into
one.
court. Like that just is a big deal in that community. And we take those things for granted.
Oh yeah, and they
Not,
all seem to make sort of a fashion statement
oh,
with
yeah.
getting past. I'm not going to wear that stuff anymore.
No.
And they were, every one of them were, and I'm not, really just don't want to just lavish praise without cause. But these young women to a person were so impressive
Yeah. Yeah.
in
They
telling their stories.
they really were. And I'm grateful that we've been able to,
Connect with
kind
a
of
few
connect
of
with,
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
some of them. And we hope, obviously, like, we don't know what they're going through on a day-to-day basis, and they've got a lot of stuff to go through getting out of a situation like that. But
Remarkable.
remarkable, and we're very impressed with them. Not that that means anything.
Well, we hope they know. We feel
Yeah.
like we're sort of connected to this whole crazy story because of Sam's insistence on pulling us in, and we're always going to be care about what happens to these young women and these
Yeah.
people involved in this. But what else? A couple of funny moments in the trial. A couple of things that have been funny
Oh my
were,
gosh.
there's not much levity in this
No,
trial,
but
but
Sam did buy this really tacky, like, it's like a wannabe Elvis white leather, like pleated jacket. And if you look at it, you're like, oh, I hope you would spend no more than $15 at like a thrift store on this.
yeah.
Come to find out, it's a $15,000 jacket.
There is, yeah. We mentioned the documentary crew, and they got a couple. They got some interesting stuff. They played some of it in court, and there's this scene where big old round Sammy's in his Bentley driving. The cameraman is sitting. Tolga is sitting in the passenger seat, and Sam is sitting confessing to all kinds of horrible things. But he's in this white leather jacket with a collar up to here, and it's sort of, it has embroidery on
Yeah, it's like
the leather. It looks like something you would buy in a cut rate men's store in the lobby of a low budget Vegas casino.
yeah,
And Sammy's driving around in this white,
Bentley.
in his Bentley, in his white leather jacket, and
It's 15 grand.
he is just buffoonery, just buffoonery.
Yeah.
And you wonder how does some people start buying a con man like that? But again, that's another psychological analysis.
We're not qualified to answer that.
Not even close.
No, but after the trial, we're gonna get more into a couple things. Maybe grade some of the lawyers' performances.
It's been fascinating to watch.
It's been fascinating, to say the least. But yeah, and then coming up this week is the last week we think we're predicting that. But defense are maybe going to call a witness, maybe not. If they don't, then they're on to closing arguments, and it looks like we're probably just going to start with closing arguments tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll find out tomorrow morning. So we'll hopefully get this edition up tonight. Just a little warm up act.
Yeah.
But it's coming down to the wire. The defense may or may not put on cases, and then the closing arguments, the jury instructions, and then it goes to this. It's a 14-person jury.
Yep.
They lost one to COVID early on, so 12 of the 14 will decide the case, and there'll be 2 alternates, and we're going to be all over. We'll be there.
Yeah, so we'll keep you posted on what the jury decides, what the closing arguments contain, and if the defense calls any witnesses. But I don't see their case having any witnesses to call.
It's difficult. Those don't have much to work with.
No, they do not. So anyway, that's our rant session for the night. But this is Story Hustler. Like and subscribe if you haven't already.
Thank you for hanging with us, and
Yeah.
we are grateful that people are showing an interest in this coverage.
Appreciate your support. Definitely. I'm Dylan.
I'm Mike.
Good night, everyone.